I have been thinking a lot about the refugee situation, as many of you have, which is probably why you're here. And I've heard recently that 4.6 million Syrians have fled now, have been forced to flee their homeland. That's the biggest migration ever. And the question is, what is the church doing about it? And that's why we're here tonight. It's a very important issue, and it's very relevant for today. Some statistics show that only 1 in 5 evangelical Christians have ever been challenged in their church to reach out to refugees. So I wonder, those of you that are here, have you heard your pastor say anything from the pulpit about refugees? Raise your hand. Awesome, a lot more than I expected. Great, that's good. And we want that to happen in more churches too. So I feel like the world is looking at the church to see what is the church going to do about this issue, because it's so huge. And the church needs to be relevant for these great issues of our time. And here's a quote from the GC2 summit that happened in Chicago last week. How will compassion compel us around the world if it doesn't even compel us across the street?
Can you hear me okay? All right, I think you can. Dave, thanks for the introduction. Like you said, I'm Jim Mullins. I'm a pastor at Redemption Church in Tempe, Arizona. And he mentioned my resume, and I think he forgot one important, profound thing that you should know about, a weighty credential that gives me, the right to speak here tonight about my academic rigor. A lot of people will come and speak as PhDs and experts and all those sorts of things, but I want you to know that I have a GED from the finest public library in all of the Phoenix metro area. So probably the least educated speaker that you've probably ever heard, but I've learned a lot of things in the school of life, the school of hard knocks, and really the school of fumbling forward and trying to follow Jesus. And that's what I'm going to tell you some stories about tonight, in particular, following Jesus and answering the question that Cherie posed earlier, and that is, how should the church respond to the refugee crisis? And over the years at Redemption Tempe and Redemption Arcadia and the other churches that we partner with in Phoenix, we've done a number of things. We've answered that question in a few ways. We've definitely had some programs. We've had some English teaching programs that have taught a few hundred people. We've done some entrepreneurship programs. We do things called peace feasts, where we have big meals that help support refugee-run restaurants and give them their best night of the year of business. But probably the most important thing, and all those things would really be worthless if it wasn't for an emphasis of just investing in friendships. And those friendships have shaped us profoundly. And not only friendships, so the reason why one of the ways we approach things is that when people get into relationships and volunteer, we ask that they do something to tangibly learn from our refugee neighbors before they start trying to serve them. That they take a posture as a learner, seeing them as an image bearer of God and having incredible dignity because of that. But I just want to tell you a few stories about my journey and how some of this stuff developed in Phoenix. It wasn't always so nice, and I didn't always really have this good heart, this heart of love towards my refugee neighbor. As a matter of fact, I know that my heart still needs to grow now, and I need to love better, but there was a day when my heart was very cold and very hostile towards anyone international. You see, I was a new believer, and it was my first week of college when 9/11 happened. And I was like 1 week into trying to figure out what it's like to be an adult. And all of a sudden, the weight of the world, these big issues landed in my lap. And instead of being a disciple of Jesus, I went home and became a disciple of the television. And I watched as the media coverage of all these world events, and eventually developed this very hostile heart towards refugees, international students, and Muslims in particular. And I was at church, and people would listen to some of the almost violent things that I would say about wiping them off the map, and there's never going to be anything good there, and just hostile things. And someone called me out. They said, "You are living and speaking in such a way that is inconsistent with Jesus. And if you don't repent of your sin towards them, then could you at least do us a favor and stop associating yourself with Jesus altogether because you're giving him a bad name?" And that conversation struck me hard. And that it led to repentance. The Spirit used that. And that eventually unfolded into me gathering a group of friends who would move into the international student neighborhoods and eventually into the refugee neighborhoods. And our whole goal was to extend friendship, extend hospitality, to pray a lot, and to just love Jesus, talk about Jesus, and to be a friend who walks well with our international neighbors. And eventually realized I didn't really have as much credibility to talk about these things when people challenged me, say, "What do you know about the world? You're just the GED guy." So my wife and I, we decided that with a group of friends that we were going to go overseas, we were going to move to Turkey, and we were going to join Jesus in this ministry of reconciliation. And that we were going to be bridge builders and peacemakers. And we eventually ended up in Turkey. And as much as I wanted to be the guy who does the good things there and wanted to be a blessing, there was an incident that profoundly blessed me and served me. You see, my daughter, who is the most precious person in the world to me, I adore her. She was born in Turkey. And she had this sweet doctor named Dr. Ebru, who recognized that we were foreigners in her country of Turkey. And she said that she felt compelled, for a number of reasons, to look after us in particular. So you know how it can be difficult to deal with bureaucracy, medical stuff sometimes. Well, she said, "This is my home phone number. You call me anytime you want. It doesn't matter if you have a cold, whatever's going on, call me if you need anything." It was about 6 weeks after my daughter was born, and my wife and I remember that evening the conversations we were having. We sat down for dinner and we were talking about the future. Hey, what should we do in the future? What's next for us? But I could tell my wife was not feeling well. And then soon it became a big problem. She went to the back for a little bit. And I walked back to see what was going on, and my wife had completely passed out. She was bleeding. She was hemorrhaging. And I didn't know what was going on or what to do. She would come in and out of consciousness. We tried calling the ambulance, but my butchered Turkish probably called the pizza company or something like that. And I was panicking. I didn't know what to do. It was nearly midnight by this time. And I picked up the phone and I called Dr. Ebru, the doctor who had delivered my daughter. She picked up the phone and she said, "You need to get to the hospital right now. Don't trust the ambulance. Find a taxi." And taxis drive crazy in Turkey. And this was like the one moment that I really loved the fact that they drove crazy. My friend had come over by this time. And we had a couple of friends over, and we picked up my wife. We carried her down 5 flights of stairs. We raced down and tracked down a taxi. The taxi came, and we put my wife in the taxi, and we zoomed, and we got to the hospital as fast as we possibly could. We got to the hospital, and you'll never believe what I saw there. There was Dr. Ebru. She was standing in the driveway of the hospital, waiting for us to pull up. And when we got there, they rushed her off into an emergency room. They told me it'd probably be about 30 minutes before I heard anything. And so I went into this waiting room. My friend eventually came. They brought my baby, my sweet little girl. And I'm holding this 6-week-old girl. And I'm wondering, is she ever going to have a memory of her mother? Is she ever going to get to know her? And how am I, as messed up as I am, going to be able to raise this kid if she goes? 30 minutes passed. Heard some footsteps in the hallway. 45 minutes passed. More footsteps. An hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 3.5 hours. And I heard footsteps in the hall, and by this time I had given up on the fact that this might be someone coming to tell me about my wife. But the door opens, and it's Dr. Ebru. Dr. Ebru comes in, and she says, your wife's going to be okay. Had you guys waited an extra 30 minutes or so, she might have hemorrhaged to death, she might have bled and died, or had serious brain damage, or something like that, but she's going to be okay. She's going to be 100% okay. The procedure worked. And I could have kissed the feet of Dr. Ebru in that moment. She was amazing. And what I found out later from one of the nurses is that Dr. Ebru had worked a 12-hour shift, was tired and exhausted, had gone home, went to bed, and within a half an hour, I called her and woke her up. And she could have left it to some other doctor, but she said that she needed to be there for us and didn't get any sleep that day. The greatest treasure of my life, the thing that I've come to love the most, just treasure the most, is the sacrificial love of Christ poured out towards me. But the best example, human example I've seen of sacrificial love that I've been a recipient of came from Dr. Ebru. A Muslim doctor, we believe different things. We wouldn't even agree on the particulars of the cross of Christ, this very central thing. But she was that example for me. And I always remember thinking about how Dr. Ebru really considered what I was going through as a foreigner in her land. The struggles that I had with language, the struggles we had with navigating the medical system, the insurance, all of these things. And she went the extra mile to serve us and provided for me the example, the template, the model of what I wanted to do eventually when I came back to America and how I would try my best to respond to those who come to America as international students, as refugees, or whatever. So we fast forward to a couple years later. I'm in Arizona. We're working as a pastor of a church, and we're starting some of the initiatives that I had mentioned before. And I have coffee with these guys, these incredible guys. Once again, I'm seeking to serve the Uzbek community, the Uzbek refugee community. And they welcomed us in with hospitality. They said, let's have our church and our community partner with each other for the good of the city. They said, yeah, we want you to serve us. We need some English classes. We need some help with some citizenship stuff we're working out, some business stuff. We started an entrepreneurship initiative that helped partner entrepreneurs from our church and entrepreneurs from their community to help start businesses together. But we found that they were really partners in the flourishing of the city. In 6 years, they started 11 businesses. How did they start those businesses? Why did they start those businesses? They sat down, they watched television one day, and this was in 2007, and they saw on the news that the economy was bad and that people were talking about, we need more jobs, we need creation of more jobs. So they said, well, we've come to this country, we've come to love this country, why don't we help create more jobs? Now, they didn't know that the people on the TV didn't mean like 10 jobs. There was like hundreds of thousands of jobs that we needed. But they took that entrepreneurship initiative, showing the common grace and the image of God in them. And it was incredible. We had this incredible partnership. And one guy in particular I grew fond of. His name was Mirzo Badil. This guy, for some reason, he became like my big brother, my uncle, the guy I trusted and cared for quite a bit. We had daughters that were the same age. And I didn't have a lot of people in life who had some of the same experiences, international experience, one daughter the same age, things like that. And so he became a very trusted friend that I would talk to about parenthood and just how to do life as a father and living in America and those sorts of things. My daughter, right about that time, this was about 4 or so years ago, was diagnosed with autism. We knew that something was going on, and when she was diagnosed, it was very hard for me. I just didn't know what to expect and what this was going to mean for her, what kind of challenges she was going to go through in life. And I knew immediately when we heard this that there were only 2 people that I really wanted to talk to in that moment. So I wanted to talk to Jesus and pray and cry out to him, and I wanted to call Mirzo Badil, who was one of the best friends I had and walking through those initial days of finding out about that. Another story is we've continued to build the friendships, and I'll kind of close with this. We've built friendships over the years. Most of what we've done of any significance, I don't think has to do with the programs that we've been a part of, but it's been in the friendships that we've formed and the bonds of trust that are built. Well, last spring, it was May 28th, I remember the date, there was a guy by the name of John in Phoenix, and he had a bunch of buddies who were motorcycle buddies, and they all decided that they were going to protest outside of a mosque. They were going to burn the Quran. They were going to draw really offensive pictures of Muhammad. They were going to yell and scream, and they were all going to bring guns. And they said that they were ready to use them, and that they were organizing this big thing that they called the Freedom of Speech Rally. And it was right in the neighborhood that's the most densely populated refugee neighborhood in our city. Can you imagine what it would be like for them to come to America, just be here just a few weeks, and to see something like that? How terrifying that would be. To go to your place of worship and see hundreds of people with guns. And so I did my civic duty. I did what we all do when we're faced with the challenges of our day and the injustices of our day. I posted something on Facebook, and I wiped my hands of my duty. I expressed my outrage. And then a friend of mine sent a message to me. She said, okay, you posted it. What are we going to do about it? This is in our state. This isn't some international issue that you can't do anything about. If we say what we really believe about Jesus, if we believe what we really say about Jesus, then what are we going to do? These are our neighbors. How are we going to love them? And so I said, oh, all right. So we organized something. We organized what we called the Love Your Neighbor Rally. Here's the thing. They said it was the freedom of speech rally. I love freedom of speech. But we wanted to utilize freedom of speech to say something better, to say that we love you as our neighbor. We don't agree theologically. We want you to believe what we believe, and you want us to believe what you believe. But you are our neighbor, and we are here to love you. So we organized a group that the idea was that we would get to the mosque before the protesters got to the mosque, and that we would get in between them and the mosque, so that when people came out of the mosque, they saw friendly faces. We were there not to be a counter-protest, but a peaceful presence that would pray, that was for everybody there, not against anybody there. And we were also going to be a physical barrier in case any shooting started happening. We lined ourselves up so that if someone started to shoot at our Muslim neighbors, because there were hundreds of guns, like AR-15s and bulletproof vests and those sorts of things, if someone would shoot, that the bullets would have to go through us to get to our Muslim neighbors before they would get to our refugee neighbors first. And that's a proposal that when you throw that out on Facebook, you don't expect a lot of people are going to show up to that party, right? So I expected for there to be like 10 of us. We showed up and were dumbfounded. We showed up and about 200 and 250 people came from the local churches around town. Over 12 churches I counted, came and lined up, prayed like crazy, put themselves as a human shield. And the reason why we did it is we were being a physical dramatization of what God did for us. If we believe that Jesus stood in the place of pain and death of us on the cross, that he stood in the place and absorbed it, we wanted to dramatize that and show that kind of love to our neighbors. We didn't yell at the folks on the other side, but when they yelled, we prayed. It was so incredible to see this 18-year-old girl who's homeschooled her whole life, never been in a crazy situation, standing across from a guy with a semi-automatic weapon and just praying for that guy. And we weren't against them either, because we gathered up water and we went and brought it to the other side and gave them water. We told, before it all started, I wanted to use some humor and defuse the thing. So I got together with the leaders of the protesters and I said, hey, if you guys could just do me one favor. And they said, yeah, what is it? And I said, listen, one thing I ask of you today. Just please don't shoot me. We had a good laugh because I told them, I said, look, I'm a fat dude and they're all going to run behind me. So I'm like the big target here. So the night went on and ISIS had been tweeting about it that day and like everything was crazy. And in a situation like that, 500 people out on the streets. There were a lot of people other than the churches that came out there too in support of our Muslim friends. But 500 people in the streets, ISIS tweeting, guns galore. And what happened? Not a single punch was thrown. Not a single shot was fired. Not a single arrest was made. At the end of the night, there were just conversations happening, and it fizzled out and those sorts of things. And all of that there's so much that's come from that I don't have time to get into, but all of that stemmed from the very simple things, not the big complex things, but the simple things of building friendships, building trust, having coffee, getting to know your neighbor. And if we're going to take Jesus seriously, who said to love your neighbor as yourself, we need to get to know our neighbor. And so those are just some stories that'll set us up for our panel tonight. Before the panel comes up, I want to ask you a question to discuss around, with the people around you, 2 or 3 people around you. And the question is this. Let's just say Canada decided to invade America or something like that. And they've got all this complex weaponry. And we are forced to flee the country into South America. You go to Mexico, for instance. You don't have money, your credentials don't transfer, all of these sorts of things. Imagine that you're there. How would you want the people to treat you when you arrived? So go ahead and discuss that, and we'll talk to the panel here in a moment.